There is a map that Benjamin Netanyahu held up at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2023. He stood at the podium of the world's most important diplomatic forum, held up a map of the Middle East, and pointed to an area labeled Israel. That area included the West Bank. It included Gaza. It included significant portions of what international law, UN resolutions, and every peace framework negotiated in the last 30 years recognizes as Palestinian territory. He called it the New Middle East. 6 weeks later, Hamas attacked, and the map became a military operation. Whether that sequence was coincidence or causation is a question that serious analysts are no longer dismissing, because what has happened in the 2 years since October 7th, in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in the explicit public statements of Netanyahu's coalition partners, looks less and less like a security response to a terrorist attack, and more like the opening phase of something that has a name: Greater Israel. And the man directing it is not a fringe ideologue operating outside the mainstream of Israeli politics. He is the longest-serving prime minister in Israeli history, the most dominant political figure the country has ever produced, a man who has spent 30 years building toward a moment that, from inside his ideological framework, looks less like a war crime and more like a historical destiny finally within reach. To understand what Greater Israel actually means, you need to understand where it comes from. The concept of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, as described in religious texts, encompasses a territory significantly larger than the modern state of Israel. The maximalist versions include all of present-day Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, parts of Jordan, parts of Lebanon, and parts of Syria. This is not a fringe reading. It is a mainstream position within religious Zionism, the ideological movement that now forms the backbone of Netanyahu's governing coalition. Netanyahu's own ideological roots run deep into this tradition. His father, Benzion Netanyahu, was a committed revisionist Zionist who believed the conflict between Jews and Arabs was permanent and existential, that no amount of compromise would produce genuine peace, and that only overwhelming force and facts on the ground could secure Jewish survival. Benjamin Netanyahu absorbed that worldview completely. He has never seriously departed from it, and the political coalition he has assembled reflects it with remarkable precision. Bezalel Smotrich, Netanyahu's finance minister, with direct administrative authority over Israeli settlements in the West Bank, has called for the annexation of the entire West Bank and the transfer of the Palestinian population. He has stated publicly that there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. He has appeared at public events in front of maps of Greater Israel that include Jordan, a sovereign nation and formal peace partner of Israel, as Israeli territory. He is not a backbencher making provocative speeches. He is a cabinet minister with direct power over settlement expansion, land allocation, and the administrative structures governing millions of Palestinians. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu's national security minister, was previously considered too extreme to serve in the Israeli military. The military itself rejected him on ideological grounds. He kept a portrait of Baruch Goldstein, the man who massacred 29 Palestinian worshippers in a Hebron mosque in 1994, on his living room wall until political pressure required its removal. He has called for the expulsion of Arab citizens of Israel he deems disloyal. He has distributed weapons to settler militias operating in the West Bank outside any formal military structure. He controls the national police force. These are not people Netanyahu is reluctantly tolerating to maintain a parliamentary majority. These are people whose goals he has consistently enabled, whose policies he has consistently implemented, and whose political support he cannot govern without. The relationship is not one of uncomfortable dependency. It is one of shared direction with complementary roles. Netanyahu provides the international credibility and the security narrative. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich provide the ideological clarity and the constituency that demands delivery. The settlement project is where the Greater Israel plan reveals itself most clearly, because settlements are not security infrastructure. They are not military installations built to protect borders. They are civilian communities, homes, schools, synagogues, shopping centers, built on land that international law, multiple UN Security Council resolutions, and the International Court of Justice all recognize as illegally occupied Palestinian territory. When the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993, approximately 110,000 Israeli settlers lived in the West Bank. Today, that number exceeds 700,000. The settler population has more than sextupled in 30 years, growing fastest and most aggressively during Netanyahu's tenures in office. The settlements are not scattered, isolated outposts that could be removed with modest political will. They are connected by Israeli-only road networks, serviced by Israeli utilities and water systems, protected by Israeli military installations, governed by Israeli civil law, integrated into Israeli society in ways that are functionally, physically, and legally indistinguishable from Israel proper. Since October 7th, settlement expansion in the West Bank has accelerated to its fastest pace in decades. Over the past year, the Israeli government approved more new settlement units than in any comparable period in recent history. Settler violence against Palestinian communities, documented by Israeli human rights organizations, by the UN, and by the Israeli military's own internal reports, has increased dramatically. Land has been confiscated under emergency military orders. Communities have been displaced, and the Israeli government has not only failed to prosecute the perpetrators, but has, in multiple documented cases, provided them with additional weapons and retroactive legal protection. This is the Greater Israel program operating at full speed. Not announced, not declared, built, quietly, continuously, and with the full administrative and military apparatus of the Israeli state behind it. October 7th gave Netanyahu something that 3 decades of settlement expansion could never fully provide. A justification that required no explanation and no defense. But watch what he did with it. The Gaza campaign has killed over 45,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health authorities. Figures the UN and multiple independent organizations consider broadly credible. Over 90% of Gaza's population has been displaced at least once. The territory's water infrastructure, hospital system, university buildings, and housing stock have been destroyed to a degree that independent engineering assessments describe as requiring decades and tens of billions of dollars to rebuild. The International Court of Justice has found it plausible that Israel's conduct constitutes genocide. Not a final legal conclusion, but the most serious international legal body on earth, saying the evidence is serious enough to require formal examination. Netanyahu has rejected every ceasefire proposal that included conditions Hamas might actually accept. He publicly undermined his own negotiating teams at moments when agreements appeared genuinely close. He dismissed sustained American pressure on humanitarian access with a consistency that suggests the alliance is being used rather than honored. He fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, for publicly questioning whether the military objectives in Gaza were achievable and whether the hostages were being prioritized. And members of his coalition have openly and repeatedly called for the permanent resettlement of Gaza with Israeli civilians, which is not a security policy, it is a colonial program. Stated in those exact terms by cabinet ministers in the Israeli parliament on Israeli television. Then Lebanon. The military campaign against Hezbollah in late 2024 expanded significantly beyond any previous operation, including the assassination of the entire Hezbollah leadership structure and substantial ground operations in southern Lebanon. Israeli officials began describing a permanent security buffer zone in southern Lebanon as a non-negotiable outcome. Buffer zones in this region have a consistent history. They develop infrastructure, they attract settlers, they stop being buffer zones. Then Syria. When Assad's government collapsed in late 2024, Israeli forces moved into the Golan Heights demilitarized zone and advanced significantly beyond it, destroying virtually the entire remaining military capacity of the Syrian state within days. Israeli officials simultaneously described the operations as defensive and began discussing permanent Israeli presence in expanded Syrian territory as a long-term security necessity. Netanyahu himself visited Israeli military positions in Syria and described the moment as historic. Look at the map he held up at the UN in September 2023. Then look at where Israeli military and settlement activity has been concentrated in the 14 months since. The overlap is not coincidental. It is a program. Netanyahu's personal legal situation cannot be separated from his political behavior. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented, public, legally verified fact. He is on trial in Israel on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. If convicted, he faces a prison sentence. If he loses power, his trial continues without the political protection that incumbency provides. His political survival and his personal legal survival are the same thing. and his political survival requires his coalition. And his coalition requires delivering the maximalist agenda of Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And that agenda is the Greater Israel program. Whether Netanyahu is a genuine ideological believer in Greater Israel or a political opportunist exploiting it for personal survival is at this point entirely irrelevant. The outcome is identical either way. Territory is being seized, populations are being displaced, and the map is getting closer to reality with every passing month. The international response has been, by any honest assessment, inadequate to the point of complicity. The United States continued providing offensive weapons throughout a campaign its own officials privately described as disproportionate, and its own legal assessments struggled to reconcile with American law on arms transfers to human rights violators. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the first time a leader of a close Western ally has faced ICC warrants. Several European countries said they would enforce them. Several said they would not. None of the countries that said they would have been tested. Netanyahu has always understood this gap. He has always known that the international community will condemn and not act, will warn and not enforce, will draw red lines and watch them crossed without consequence. He built his entire 30-year strategy around that precise understanding, and that understanding has been validated every single time. 700,000 settlers on illegally occupied land, expanding at the fastest pace in decades. Cabinet ministers openly advocating annexation and population transfer with the legal authority to implement it. A map shown at the UN 6 weeks before the deadliest attack in Israeli history that labeled occupied Palestinian territory as Israel. Military operations in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, whose scope and duration consistently exceed any defined security objective and consistently produce territorial and political facts that serve one coherent vision. Benjamin Netanyahu is not the first leader to use security language to pursue territorial ambition. He is not the first to use a genuine threat as cover for objectives that go well beyond responding to that threat. He is not the first to build facts on the ground faster than the international community can formulate a response. But he may be the most successful. And the map he is building, one settlement, one military operation, one displaced community at a time, is becoming harder to deny with every passing month. The only question that remains is whether anyone with the power to stop it is willing to say clearly what it is. So far, the answer has been no.